How's it going, everybody? Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, live Patriots Beat podcast here on this Thursday afternoon. Alex, we are less than 1 week from the start of Patriots training camp. It's hard to believe that the offseason is over, but we are almost there. We are 6 days away from football, at least players being back out on the field. We won't get to full padded practices until maybe the second or third day of training camp, but we'll at least get to see players back out on the field on Wednesday. Media availability all day Tuesday with Patriots head coach Bill Belichick and some of the captains and returning captains of the Patriots and things like that. So everything's sort of starting to slowly get underway. The rookies are back in the building. Everybody is signed and under contract among that rookie class. So we're starting to hear some tricklings out of things going on and things happening and people reporting, and football is almost here.
Yeah, it's feeling really real. And I'll tell you, there's some of the ancillary stuff. Obviously, everything you just mentioned kind of gives you the feeling, but the culture of football, everything around it is starting to feel that way. We have college football rankings coming out next week. We have Madden ratings coming out next week, which I am going to make you talk about at some point. Just the little things that kind of happen around this time of year are starting to happen. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love training camp. And this show is made for training camp. Like the two of us live and breathe training camp. And
I've said since college, because I covered where I went to a D3 school. I mean, we went to the same school. I went to a D3 school. So we got, pretty close access to the team. We were really the only ones covering them. And we used to go to practice every day and we could watch the whole practice. And
right.
I remember there's nothing better than just standing outside, standing up on a hill somewhere and watching football practice for like 2.5 hours. It's so much fun.
Right. So we both love it. This is, I would say, besides maybe the draft, I do love the draft. So
the draft is great too.
Yeah, I always get caught up in which one I like more, but training camp is definitely, if not number one on my list, it's number two of my favorite times of year. And Alex and I are going to be on the podcast at least twice a week. And we might even do more than that to break down everything out.
I think probably Wednesday, since it's the first day of practice.
Right. Yeah. So we'll definitely be here with you guys every step of the way during training camp, breaking down everything that we see. And I'm really excited that the fans will be back out at camp. A whole much bigger pool of reporters will be allowed to be back out at camp as well. So Alex and I will bring all of the camp coverage starting next week. But for now, we're still in preview mode. I can't wait till we can actually talk about some real football, but we're still in preview mode right now. So we previewed the defense last week. This week, we're going to preview the offensive side of the ball for the Patriots. And I think similarly to the defense, and we're going to get into our rankings here in a moment of who is going to lead the team in receptions. Henry McKenna threw this out there yesterday. I think it's an interesting talking point because
fun little exercise.
Yeah, it's a fun little exercise because they're just like on the defense. There's so many new faces and there's so much change on this side of the football. It all looks great on paper, but how it's all going to come to fruition and how it's all going to come together during the season. You could make this top five. We did top five, and you could make this top five 10 different ways, and I would believe you, right? Like it's really feels like no one has any clue who's going to kind of step up, who's going to be that number one target for whoever's under center, and all these types of things that can come together once the season actually starts. But Alex, we both made top five lists 1 through 5 of who we feel is going to be the team leader in receptions from 1 through 5. I want to get into our list, and then I want to talk about the one guy that we both left off that I think we both, felt like we wanted to have on there, but we did cut it off at 5. But let's throw your list up there first. Yep. So I can bash it. No, I'm just kidding. And then we'll get to my list. But here is Alex's list of who will lead the Patriots in receptions, and you have a surprise a little bit to me, at least at number 1, and I like where your head's at. I want to hear your explanation to it of having Jonnu Smith in that top spot.
So basically what I did is I started with, I went back and I looked at the 2011 Patriots, and that team actually Wes Welker led in receptions, but this team doesn't have a Wes Welker, obviously. And then it's the two tight ends. It's Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. And I think that Jonnu Smith in some ways, so both tight ends are going to be heavily used, but I think Jonnu Smith in some ways can fill that Wes Welker role that he filled in 2011. I don't know that they're going to run him out of the slot like that, like directly, but I think he can take some of that workload that Wes Welker had in 2011. The other thing is, I think whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Cam Newton or Mac Jones, Cam Newton said, right, that he was having trouble with the pre-snap reads, and Mac Jones obviously is a rookie. So I think that there's going to be a heavy investment in plays that are screened open, both maybe complicated motion stuff, but even things as simple as screens. And who is the biggest beneficiary of schemed open plays in this offense, or who should it be? And that's Jonnu Smith. So I'm actually going to go Hunter Henry for yards, and I'm going to go James White for touchdowns. But if we're talking about receptions specifically, I'm going to go Jonnu Smith. I was really tough at 3-4. James White has been a Patriots top 3 leading receiver for the last 5 years, but he did have a little bit of a down year last year. So I was really close on 3 and 4. You can flip those. And at 5, too, I know you want to talk about it separately in a little bit, but it really was a coin flip, Nelson Aguilar versus Kendrick Bourne.
Right. So I understand where you're coming from with Jonnu Smith. Basically, your argument is that they're going to have to be a smoke and mirrors offense in a lot of ways, and Jonnu is the best guy to use in those gadget type of plays, right? To force him the ball as a ball carrier, get him into space, and let him create with it in his hands. If anybody is going to do that amongst the Patriots pass catchers that they have currently, it's probably going to be Jonnu.
And I think too, there's some plays here that, I mean, like a pop pass, right? That's a catch,
right?
But that's not, you know, so like you got to consider things like that too.
Right. So number 1, Jonnu Smith. Number 2 with Hunter Henry. Just why not Hunter Henry over Jonnu for you?
Well, so again, I think some of that scheme stuff, I think too, Henry's going to be more, I think they're actually going to kind of use him as an X. I think they're going to use him more as a guy who can stretch the field. Now he'll do it on the middle of the field instead of the outside, and he won't be as much of a volume guy where he'll be a big play guy. I just also think, you know, if you're a defense and you're scheming things up, there's more guys in the league, and there's more defenses in the NFL built to cover Hunter Henry than maybe there are Jonnu Smith, in that, you know, there's other guys like Hunter Henry out there that you're going to have to cover, whether it be a guy like a Mike Gesicki, a guy like a Travis Kelce. I don't know that in this 2 tight end system, there's as many pre-built, you know, existing defensive game plans to cover a guy like Jonnu Smith.
So I think where your head's at with this, because we're going to pull up my list in a second. We differed a little bit here. I think where your head is at with, in terms of Hunter Henry, is that he's going to exist in high leverage situations.
Yes.
And that's going to be where they're really going to go to him, but he's not necessarily going to be a 125 target type of guy, right, where they're going to him all the time. It's more going to be, it's 3rd and 8. We need a first down. Henry's our guy. It's red zone situation. Henry's our guy here, but not necessarily 1st and 10. Henry's our guy.
Right. I see him. I see it in some ways. Jonnu is the drive starter. Henry's the drive finisher. And I'll add too, because I forgot to mention, there's also the injury concern with Hunter Henry. And I've downplayed that since they signed him, and I stand behind that. But I do think that they are, at least early in the season, maybe going to limit his workload a little bit.
Okay, and the last one I wanted to talk about with your list, we're going to talk about Jakobi Meyers a little bit too, because I want to bring up my list before we discuss him. James White at number 4 over both Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne. I think we both feel like last year is sort of a wash for James White based off of everything that happened off the field for him. And we kind of are giving him a pass, right? To kind of bounce back and get back to his usual form. The only hesitancy I have with James White being on this list over a guy like Bourne is, if it is Cam Newton under center, is he going to be efficient enough to his checkdowns for James White to be fed? Right, because he was pretty good with Christian McCaffrey's rookie year. Cam did get him the ball pretty frequently, but you're going to have to see a much better timing through the offense, if you will, out of Cam Newton in order for a guy like James White to be the old James White that we're used to with Tom Brady.
So even with everything that happened last year, James White was 2nd on the team in receptions. He had 49 despite only playing 14 games, 2nd only to Jakobi Meyers. Over the past 4 years, he's been top 2 in receptions on this team, reliably. It's a historical context thing for me. He's always in their top 2. I felt bad putting him 4. I wanted to put him 3, but there did look to be a little bit of a physical drop off, as there generally is for backs of his age. So, I really, I think I had him second at one point when I was doing this, and I was really back and forth between 3rd or 4. But if he's not in the top 4 and for receptions, or at least for targets, I would be very surprised, assuming he stays healthy.
Okay, so
they also don't have Rex Burkhead, who is their second leading receiving back. So there's actually room for his targets to go up. Okay, now you can go.
Okay, I want to put it up one last time. Is there anything else that I didn't question you on here that you wanted to bring up about your list?
I would say, because I saw people doing this on Twitter. Some people were saying that they were like qualifying. N'Keal Harry gets traded, he doesn't. This is my list, whether N'Keal Harry's on the team or not. I'll qualify that.
Okay. All right. I like that. And I also want to qualify our list with, we're not doctors. We're not out here trying to predict people are going to get hurt, right?
Yeah, this is injuries off.
Right. We're assuming that everybody's going to be out there at least enough, maybe not the full 16 games, but nobody's going to be an IR season ender type of injury, because none of us we shouldn't really be predicting that kind of stuff. All right. Here is my list. I definitely differed a little bit with you on the tight ends. I feel like whether we had Aguilar at 5 and White at 4 or vice versa, it doesn't really matter too much. But the two at the top that I had, number 1, Hunter Henry, and number 2, Jacoby, I think opens up the conversation that we wanted to have a little bit about Kendrick Bourne once we get to Jacoby. Number 1 with Hunter Henry, personally, I just feel like Hunter Henry against man coverage, zone coverage, just in terms of running routes and his ability to get open, is now the most dynamic Patriots pass catcher on the team. Because as much as I hear you about all the scheme stuff with Jonnu and all that kind of thing, Hunter Henry's ability to run routes is far superior to Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith is not a tactical route runner, right? He is a guy that can get vertically up the field very well, and he's a guy that can be schemed open and then create with the ball in his hands after the fact, but not necessarily someone that runs crisp routes. Hunter Henry has won successfully in the NFL despite, I would say, I wouldn't call it lacking athleticism, but he's not an all-out explosive type of guy. He's not somebody that really burns up the field, but yet he still gets open in the phone booth because he's very physical at the top of the route. He's very good through his breaks with his footwork. He understands leverage. He understands how to get open against certain coverages. So to me, I feel like, and we're capping this with as long as everybody is healthy, right? I do think that Hunter Henry can return to that 2015, 2016 Hunter Henry form when he first broke into the league with the Chargers. That was a different player than the guy in terms of receiving, than the guy that we've necessarily saw the last couple of years in Los Angeles / San Diego. So if he can get back to that version of Hunter Henry, who was one of the best receiving tight ends in football at that time, I think he's going to be a highly, highly productive player for the Patriots.
So you kind of psychoanalyzed my list. Can I take my turn at yours here? So
absolutely.
You have Jacoby second. So do you basically believe Jacoby is the replacement for the Edelman role, that's his spot? Cut it, send it, is done.
Yeah. So this is the conversation that I really wanted to have, was because it's really between Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne for that role, right? And whoever wins that role is going to be very, very high on this list.
Yes.
And we saw some people that had Kendrick Bourne all the way up at 1, right? Like, people were throwing out their lists yesterday. So whoever wins that battle for those reps as the second receiver, because you're going to assume that Aguilar is going to be out there for field stretching purposes pretty much a lot of the time. Like, I think Aguilar is probably going to be the guy that leads the team or leads the wide receiver group in snaps, similarly to why Damiere Byrd led the receivers in snaps last year. Even though he wasn't necessarily the best receiver on the team, he was a field stretcher and a burner, and they needed that guy to stretch the defense a little bit. I think it's similar situation with Aguilar. With Jacoby versus Kendrick Bourne, that's really what it's going to come down to. And every single time you doubt Jacoby, that guy just gets open. Like, it's not necessarily the flashiest. He's not the most explosive guy. He's not the best, most dynamic route runner in terms of vertical speed and all these kinds of things. But yet he still gets open. And you watch the way that corners go up against him, and it's like he's faster than he actually is sometimes, because guys actually really do respect his vertical stems and his vertical speed off the line of scrimmage, even though he's like a 4.55, 4.6 guy and isn't going to run by anybody. These DBs are backpedaling every single time he releases vertically up the field, and he's able to break off those routes. I just don't want to sleep on Jakobi Meyers, because I do think that he really started to come on last year, and I don't think that was just all good player, bad team, NBA kind of comp there, where like one guy has to shoot 40 shots, so he averages 25 a game. I don't think that it was all that for Jakobi Meyers. I actually think that he really blossomed into a good player and is going to be a productive player again.
So I guess what I would say is, and I don't disagree with any of that, I think Meyers is going to be a good player, but do you think he'll be good enough? Or even if he is, do you think Josh McDaniels says, here's Julian Edelman's entire role, it's yours? Like, I think they're going to break it up. I think Meyers will get a good chunk of it, but I think Bourne gets some of it. And I also think Jonnu Smith and James White get some of those responsibilities as well, schematically, that Julian Edelman used to handle. I mean, he was a massive, massive part of their offense. And I just don't see them giving all of that immediately to Jakobi Meyers right away. I think he gets a good chunk of it, but I think Edelman's going to be replaced by committee. And that's kind of why I had mine lined up how I did.
Yeah, last year Jakobi Meyers was that guy. He talked about
they didn't really have anybody
all
else.
This stuff. They had nobody else. That's a fair point. And I think what we both struggled with on both of our lists, because we each only had, I think, 2 wide receivers, right? We didn't have that third wide receiver in there. And what
I think we both probably have Kendrick Bourne at 6, though, right? I mean, I do.
Oh yeah. I think what we both struggled with is, you're going to be in 12 personnel so often, because you're not going to take either of those 2 tight ends off the field.
This is the starting offense right here that we're looking at. Regardless of the order, this is the for lack of a better term, this is the base offense.
Right. And maybe you can swap out Damian Harris on first and second down with James White, but this is their 12. This is their money. Got to have it. End of the game, need to put a drive together, 12 personnel, right here, we think, unless Bourne again beats out Jakobi Meyers. But the problem is trying to put Bourne on this list over even a guy like a James White potentially, or even over a guy like Aguilar, is opportunity and chances. Because if they're going to run so many packages with only 2 wide receivers on the field, either Meyers or Kendrick Bourne, somebody's going to be the odd man out. Right. And I think right now, based off of, I would say, a little bit of mini camp, but mostly just how good Jakobi Meyers was last year, maybe, I think both of us have sort of decided that's going to be Jakobi Meyers.
So the one thing I wonder, right, if there's a way to open it up for Kendrick Bourne here, if Hunter Henry proves to be a good enough field stretcher with size instead of speed, and I know that that's not easy to do, but if he can kind of be the downfield threat guy, and Aguilar didn't have an amazing spring. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't great.
Did drop
if that kind of keeps up, does Hunter Henry, I'm trying to think of how to do this within the actual terminology, and I'm confusing myself. Does Hunter Henry essentially become the X, and then Meyers and Bourne are your 2 receivers working underneath? It's
possible. I think that they're going to want to have Aguilar out there, because even if he's not a highly productive receiver, and this is, I think, something that I am going to argue with Patriots fans all season long, because they're going to sit there and they're going to say they're paying the guy $12.5 million. He's only has 30 catches on the season. We're in week 15. They're overpaying this player. But what you really have to look at with him, to me, is how are other teams aligning their safeties? Right. And how does the middle of the field look? Does it look crowded? Or are those safeties creeping down? And every single time Johnny runs up the seam or Hunter Henry runs over the middle of the field, that deep safety is crashing down and trying to take away that route? Or is Nelson Aguilar's effect on the offense good enough that he's pushing those safeties back, that he's forcing the post safety to respect the deep patterns, and he's forcing these guys in the back end of the defense, even against the run? Right? Can he prevent teams from crowding the line of scrimmage because he brings that vertical speed? The second that you take Aguilar off the field, if you're the Patriots, they're already one of the slowest offenses in the league. Even with him out there, they now become easily the slowest offense in the NFL if you take him off the field.
Again, I'm not saying it's likely, but I just think if Bourne's going to get regular snaps, I think it's Aguilar. Like Aguilar to me is the most likely guy coming off, unless they start going without running backs, which is possible too. Because without Rex Burkhead, does Jonnu Smith essentially become your second receiving back besides James White? Again, I'm going out of the box here, but
no,
it just kind of proves how cemented that group is. Like the only other way is, okay, James White needs a rest. Ramondre Stevenson's not ready. Either they make Damian Harris the second pass catching back, or they run Jonnu Smith out of the backfield, which he's done, and then Kendrick Bourne comes on, and you're in, what would that be? 0-2 personnel, right?
Without the running back, yeah.
Yeah, you're in 0-2. So that would really be the only other way I could see it happening. Can I ask you a question about this? Just kind of extend it.
But I want to go off of that point though, because when they signed these two tight ends, and especially when they signed Johnny with all the things that he did in the backfield for Tennessee, my mind instantly went to 0-2 personnel, right? Yeah. Like, can they pull that off? And secondly, they can obviously pull it off, but are they going to want to put Jonnu out there like that? Not because it's not a good way to use him, but if you remember, they definitely used Aaron Hernandez like that out of the backfield quite a bit. And he had a carry. I want to say it must have been 2011, right? Because, obviously everything happened after that. So I think it was 2011, and they handed the football off to Aaron Hernandez with him coming out of the backfield. He got popped and he got a concussion, right? And he was concussed for the rest of the season. And you wonder, playing running back and carrying the football like that, is the body blows is a factor, right? And how much do you want to unveil that? Now, the Patriots, when they went to Aaron Hernandez out of the backfield, that was in playoff games, big, prime time playoff type implication games. It was situationally, right? It wasn't like that was their offense all the time, because they didn't want to risk Hernandez getting hurt out of the backfield. But this Patriots team, we hope they're back in the playoffs, but they're going to have to fight their way into the playoffs. It's not like they're going to walk into the playoffs like that Patriots team.
We'll see how many losses the Bills have to, give up with Cole Beasley and Josh Allen, but that's another story.
Right. So at what point in time do we get into a point of the season? Is that right away that Josh McDaniels throws that out? Because that is by far, no disrespect to James White, who's a really good player, but I really feel like from a passing standpoint, that might be their most dynamic group, right?
Right. Well, that's kind of the thing, and you just kind of touched on it there. Yes, handing Smith the ball is definitely an inherent risk, and you do need to do it once or twice to keep defenses off guard, but you're probably not in that set in a situation where you're realistically going to run it anyway. I think being one-sided in terms of a passing tendency out of that set maybe isn't the worst thing in the world, because you're not using it in situations where the defense is going to expect run anyway. And there's still ways to get him the ball, Jonnu Smith the ball, creatively out of the backfield, out of that set, that aren't as risky. I talked about the pop pass before, screens, things like that.
They used to throw that little swing pass to Hernandez in the flat, where they would just swing him out and run kind of like a little. It wasn't a full on. I guess it kind of was a screen, but there was
like a bubble. Yeah. So there's ways around it. Right. There's ways around taking that risk, and I'm not coming out and again. Maybe if you're in the playoffs, maybe if it's for the game, you're doing this, but I'm not coming out in that set in like 2nd and 3. I'm saving that for 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 2-minute drill, things like that, where the defense isn't going to be keying in on the run anyway.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, let's wrap this up and get on to some of these other players on the offense. But
can I ask you 2 questions?
Sure.
Because they're part of this conversation. Do the Patriots have a 100-catch receiver this year? Yes or no?
I think the only guy that could get to 100 would be Jacoby, and I don't think he's going to get the target share to get to 100, so I'm going to say no.
I think they're going to make a big-time point of spreading the ball out. I'm also going to say no.
Yeah.
We just did catches. Yards. Give me your top 3.
Ooh. If I'm going to go yards, man, that's tough. Because
we did catches. I mean, it's an arbitrary stat. We might as well do the other 2 big ones.
It's fair. All right. So if I'm going to go yards, I still think Hunter Henry is going to lead them in yards as well. But I would probably have it the same with Hunter Henry, Jacoby, Jonnu, 1, 2, 3.
I would agree with that for yards. I have
Okay.
I think catches and yards. One of my bold predictions for the season, spoiler alert, will be that the leader in catches, yards, and receiving touchdowns will be 3 different players. I think they're really going to spread it out. So, Evan, touchdowns. We'll just do leader for this one. Give me your leader for receiving touchdowns.
Jonnu Smith. I think they're going to find so many creative ways down by the goal line to get him the ball in his hands. There's that one play that always stands out to me from his Tennessee days where they handed to him on a jet sweep coming across the formation.
And so just receiving touchdowns. Just receiving touchdowns.
Okay, well, maybe they pop pass it to him instead.
Okay.
So it counts as a receiving touchdown. He can also box people out, go above the rim, do the whole contested catch thing as well. He did it. It was a really good kind of above the rim contested catch receiver with the Titans too. So I think that he's going to be a real menace in the red zone. So I'll go Jonnu.
I'm actually going to go James White. I think that with 2 tight ends back on the field, remember what a mismatch James White was against the middle linebackers in the red zone there, 2017, 18, 19. Part of the reason he didn't see that, I think, last year is there weren't tight ends tying up the safeties, right. So the safeties could come up and help on James White. I think you're going to start seeing a lot of James White in the red zone on these slower linebackers again. He's going to take advantage. He's going to feast. So I have Jonnu Smith leading in catches, Hunter Henry leading in yards, James White leading in touchdowns. Those are my right.
And I go Hunter Henry, Jonnu.
Okay, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to write this down. We'll revisit this after week 8. But
I like it.
It's interesting.
Alex, for full disclosure, Alex usually nails these, and I'm usually completely off. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Our guy Murph is pointing out that James White's production gets hurt by Cam. He really wants.
But again, he was the second leading receiver on the team last year. I don't. Because this is all relative to everybody else. We can talk about, and that's why I asked you the 100 catch question, because the order to me almost isn't as relevant as does their leading receiver have 100 catches or does he have 50 like he did last year? So, this is, again, it's relative to everybody. James White's overall production goes down because of Cam. How they scheme it, his production relative to just the other players on the team, I think that it's certainly the quarterback factors into an extent, but not massively. I think James White's going to get what he's going to get relative to the rest of the players, regardless of who the quarterback is. Now, whether he catches 5 touchdowns or 10 touchdowns, whether he has 50 catches or 75 catches, that's going to come down to the quarterback. But where he is relative to everybody else, I actually don't think the quarterback matters too much.
Okay, so let's get into some of these other. We kind of just talked about the core of the offense in terms of pass catchers, but we didn't mention a lot of guys that I think people are interested to see in camp or maybe are interested in the storylines with. Let's start with the tight ends, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, the second-year tight ends. Asiasi did have some flashes at the end of last year. I thought he had a decent mini camp as well. He did make a few catches in team drills during mini camp. I think Devin Asiasi can play. The problem is that the Patriots went out and signed Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. Obviously, the opportunity is not going to be there. So he's probably just going to be a number 3 tight end on the depth chart right now. But I do feel like Asiasi's got something there, and I don't know if it's enough to really warrant trading him because I'm not sure the value is really going to be there, that they're actually going to get something that's going to matter to them in return. But how do you feel about Devin Asiasi going into this year? And I guess maybe the biggest question with him is Hunter Henry especially, but Jonnu Smith a little bit too, have been known to get nicked up a little and have some injuries throughout the season. Do you feel better about Devin Asiasi having to play a more prominent role this year if, let's say, Hunter Henry were to go down with an injury?
Well, I guess I feel better that he doesn't have to play a prominent role. I said it before. I do think that they're going to be a little careful with Hunter Henry early on, given his injury history. But maybe that's the way for Asiasi to develop. And this is the problem last year. He was just kind of thrown out there as go be the guy, and he was facing top tight end coverage, and that's tough. Not that he wouldn't in place for Henry, but I think that they can kind of bring him along, right? They can say, hey, you're going to get, this drive. You're going to get these next 2, 3, 4 plays. But in high leverage situations, they obviously have a much better option in Hunter Henry. So based on what we saw last year, do I feel great about it? No. But after what we saw this spring, and that I think that there is a really solid opportunity in place to help him develop within game reps. And the preseason too is going to be huge. That makes me feel a little bit better about it because I think they will be able to develop him in season as the year goes on. And if it's later in the season and they have to turn to him, we'll see how it's going. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a point where, he's still a drop off from Hunter Henry, but it's not a massive drop off. If it's like week 1, that could be a problem.
So I think there's 2 ways that he gets on the field. Obviously injury is one of them, but you sort of mentioned them kind of easing the workload a little bit of Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith just to keep those guys fresh. We could see the first couple of weeks of the season, I think, if Asiasi has a really good training camp and really good preseason, maybe he does mix in a little bit with those guys early on just to save those guys for later on in the season. The other thing I'll say about Asiasi is even though he had some issues, I would say, with drops last year and things of that nature as a receiver, when you started to see him block well as a run blocker for Patriots tight ends, that's always where it starts for all Patriots pass catchers, really, right? Like when they start blocking their butts off, that's always a good sign. And I really thought that he held up as an inline blocker, and that's sort of where it starts to be the confidence starts to build and things start to come up from that. And the pass catching, the receiving hopefully comes more so after the fact, once you get the blocking going and once they feel comfortable as blockers, because they put so much on tight ends' plates with the blocking. So I'm really interested to see how Asiasi kind of carries that spring into the summer, because he did look like a viable NFL tight end out there at minicamp. Granted, that was just minicamp, so let's see how it looks in training camp. How about Dalton Keene? What is Dalton Keene's role on this team? What's his purpose on this team? Because I continue to come back to with him that I sort of just feel like the reason why they're going to stick it out with him is because of sunk cost. And I understand that Bill Belichick might be a little bit above that, but they traded so much to come back up in the 3rd round to draft this guy that to give up on him 1 year into that experiment seems a little hasty even for Bill. And but to me, that's like the only thing I can come up with is the reason why he should really even be on this team. Like he has no role, he has no position. Like, what are we doing here with Dalton Keene?
Well, we did talk about using Devin Asiasi to spell Hunter Henry. You can use Dalton Keene to spell Jonnu Smith. I think too, and we've talked about this before. I keep saying we've talked about this before. We need training camp already. Let's go. The fullback position as it's existed in New England for the last 4 or 5 years, right? That James Devlin role it's really not going to have a spot this year, at least not a predominant one. If you're going 2 tight ends and a running back and a fullback, that's 1 wide receiver on the field. And it's not going to work in the modern NFL. As much as I would love to see that, it's not going to work a ton.
Not unless it's 4th and inches and you're just trying to, play bully ball. Right.
Look, there will be room for a pure lead blocking fullback, but it's not going to be a ton of snaps. It's really, like you said, 4th and 1 goal line. And we've seen the Patriots get creative with that before, whether it be offensive linemen. We've seen them use defensive linemen like that. And they certainly have guys on this team who can do that. Christian Barmore, I believe, did that a couple times at Alabama. Just one example. I'm sure Lawrence Guy could do it. And, I'm sure Devon Gottschalk could do it. We've seen them use a linebacker in that spot. They threw the ball to a Landon Roberts. So,
or they could use one of their offensive linemen off the bench to do it.
Is the easy one. You put Justin Herron back there. Right. Ted Karras maybe. So there's ways for them to get that when they need it. And because they won't need a lead fullback as much, a traditional lead fullback, I wonder if Dalton Keene slips on as a move fullback, as a guy who's maybe more of a passing weapon out of the fullback position and a backup tight end, and he grabs Jakob Johnson's spot. So to me, that's how he makes it on the roster, is they want a fullback, but they don't want that James Devlin, Jakob Johnson type. And then he also provides insurance for Jonnu Smith, because you're not going to put Devin Asiasi out there in the role Jonnu Smith is playing, right? If Jonnu gets hurt, and you don't have Dalton Keene, that role is gone. Now, can Dalton Keene, carry that role? I don't know. We'll have to see, but at least you have a chance. Then you have to get to the question of, was Dalton Keene, so ineffective last year that he can get to the practice squad? Because if you can do that, 2 birds, 1 stone. You don't have to keep him on the roster, but you still have him if you need him. So I think that's Keene's path to the roster. It's a convoluted one. It's not exactly clear cut, but I'm not writing him off. I'm not using him. I'm not having him as an automatic roster cut right away. Whatever the opposite of a roster lock is, I guess a camp body. I'm not counting him as a camp body just yet.
Oh, absolutely not. And I agree.
Fodder, I guess, would be the word.
Right. I agree with you 100% in the fact that his way to be on this team is to be the guy that wears all the hats. Right? Like, just do everything. Play in the kicking game. Play a little bit of tight end. Play a little bit of fullback. Move him around. And that's what
special
I think.
Teams.
Yeah, special teams. I think that's exactly what he's going to have to do to continue to make this team. And they've been reluctant to go full H-back, but Jonnu really is kind of a full H-back when they use him in those kind of motion plays and plays out of the backfield, and that's going to be a part of this offense, I think, moving forward. So maybe we see a little bit more of that than we've have typically seen, and that James Devlin battering ram fullback is sort of out, but we sort of see that for Dalton Keene as a path here to make this team. But where does that leave Jakob Johnson? Because Jakob Johnson has developed into a nice lead blocker. He's not James Devlin, but he can play that James Devlin type of role. But like we just said, how many snaps does that role get this year? 10% maybe if we're pitching it. So I guess it could be higher, but I don't know. It just seems to me like as good of a story as Jakob Johnson has been, the find in the international pathway program and all these kinds of things, as much as he has developed into that role, it just sort of feels like that role is obsolete. And there are some options with Jakob Johnson, right? They can designate him as an international pathway player. He wouldn't be eligible to play this year, but they would protect him from getting poached by another team.
And he wouldn't take up... And he wouldn't take up any spot. He wouldn't take up a spot on the roster, not on the practice squad. So you basically say, hey, we're going to put you on the shelf for the year, and then you revisit it next year.
Exactly. That's a chestnut checkers type of move by Bill Belichick, right? Like, you don't need that fullback this year, but maybe the offense shifts, maybe things change next year, and then you can still revisit it with Jakob Johnson instead of losing him to another team.
Yeah, no, I think that, we have to see how it all plays out in camp, but if you're not going to use the guy this year and you have a way to hold on to him, you do kind of have to make sure that that's okay with him, right? If he doesn't want to sit out the year and he thinks he can go sign and play somewhere else, you do kind of have to let him go. But, if he says, yeah, I like being a Patriot and maybe there's not a huge market for fullbacks, which there usually isn't, then maybe he says, yeah, that works for me. I'm still getting paid, all that. He gets to hang out around the team still, and then you revisit again next year.
It's possible. I understand people's, because I believe in my last roster projection, I had Jakob Johnson off the team, and I got a lot of pushback from people about that, right? Because he has been a good player in his role for the Patriots last year. But it just kind of feels to me like that fullback position is, unless he's doing some other things, whether it's the kicking game potentially or whatever.
Which he can do.
Yeah, he's got to make himself valuable somehow beyond just being that lead blocker, because there's just not going to be the reps there to warrant carrying that player. Like you said, you put one of the tight ends back there, you put one of the offensive linemen back there. Heck, you could put one of the defensive linemen back there in a goal line situation and do it that way. Mike Vrabel played fullback for the Patriots. Landon Roberts played fullback for the Patriots. So there's all sorts of possibilities if they really need to get that traditional fullback on the field and they don't have Jakob Johnson rostered. Is he valuable enough to make the team? Let's jump back over to the wide receivers. Some of these depth wide receivers, if you will. We talked about the top three guys, but what about your boy Gunner? Is he going to blossom into a receiving threat this year, or are we still talking about Gunner as just kind of a punt returner only?
So hang on, let me pull up the numbers here, because we've done this before. I do think he's going to make the team and he'll contribute a little bit as a receiver. I don't know how much it's going to be, but he should catch a couple passes this year. So here's the comp. Julian Edelman caught 37 passes his rookie year, but they were pretty banged up that year, right? He then catches 7 for 21. He doesn't break out until 2013 when he catches 105. That's his fifth year in the league at the age of 27. Gunnar Olszewski is going into his third year in the league at the age of 25. So using Julian Edelman as the comp, using Julian Edelman's pace, there's still 2 years before Gunnar Olszewski is really set to break out. I don't know that he does this year. And at the same time, if he doesn't, I'm not going to be concerned with his development as a receiver. As long as we don't see any regression, as long as he's, at least slightly better than he was last year. And by the way, last year he caught 20 passes, which Edelman in his second year caught 7.
Did he really catch 20 passes last year?
Looking at this right now. No, he didn't. I'm looking at the return numbers.
See,
I don't know why it's only giving me the return numbers. He caught
because I think he caught big
5 passes, 5 for 62 yards. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So if he's in that like 15 to 20 catch range is where I think he should be. That's about right for him.
Yeah, I'm not worried at all about if Gunnar develops as a receiver either, because he still brings a ton of value as a punt returner to the team. He's going to make the team as a punt returner, and we'll see. If they get anything out of him as a receiver, they've already gotten more than you would hope for and dream for out of him as a punt returner.
Right.
So if they get anything out of him as a receiver, it's a bonus. How about
real quick, I think the real leap for him to take this year is kick returner. Because he struggled with that last year, and he'll have this is going to be one of the more interesting position battles as kick returner. I think that if he can be the kind of kick returner he is as a punt returner, he never needs to develop into a receiver, and they'll still keep him. It's not quite the same thing. People say, oh, if you can do one, why can't you do the other? They're very different. But if he can emerge as a kick returner, that to me is almost a bigger development than if he emerges as a receiver.
100%, because the next guy that I'm going to bring up here is Isaiah Zuber, who I think that's
his biggest competition.
Right. If he finds his way on the team, looks like a great possibility to be returning kickoffs. And maybe even JJ Taylor did that a little bit in college as well. And we can get to JJ Taylor here in a second.
And he did last year.
Yeah. Out of that Zuber, Trey Nixon, Marvin Hall, even I know there's a lot of love
Christian Wilkerson
out of that group. Who do you like? These guys, I think Zuber has sort of separated himself a little bit in mini camp, but Nixon's a rookie, so I don't know if we would have expected much out of Nixon, a 7th round pick in his first mini camp and a really difficult offense, all these things, right? I don't know if we really expect that.
And he was hurt too, I think, for part of the spring. So, yeah, I like Zuber, and it goes beyond, he was doing everything last year. It looked like he was everything but a polished receiver. And he looks more polished this year, which is big, but that's not even necessarily why I'm drawn to him making the team. We talked about before, what do you do, right? If Jonnu Smith gets hurt, who fills that role? And Dalton Keene, maybe. But if Dalton Keene, if you don't keep him, it's going to look a little different, but we saw Isaiah Zuber kind of used as that gadget player last year, right? That, motion snap, pop pass, scheme open kind of guy. Can he maybe in some ways fill in what you were doing with Jonnu Smith if you lose Jonnu? There's also the special teams ability there. He can play a little running back on third downs, like as a pass catching running back, line up in the backfield. We saw him do that in college. So he can do a ton, right? And I think that, is Marvin Hall maybe more polished traditional receiver? Yeah, probably. Is Christian Wilkin more polished traditional receiver? Yeah, probably. But there's just so much that Isaiah Zuber can do. I think he ultimately gets the nod. And I do like Trey Nixon. I think he is a future. He, to me, is a guy that they try to get on the practice squad, work with away from game action for a year. And then when he comes back next year, kind of like we're doing with Isaiah Zuber now, he wasn't realistically a guy last year. He needed polish. Now he has a year under his belt, and he looks like a realistic option. I think Trey Nixon is essentially a year behind where Isaiah Zuber is. Yeah. Do you want to give the breaking news?
I want to give the breaking news. I didn't want to cut off because you were on a roll.
Well, but I was trying to read it. Hang on. Can I do the siren?
So
I think this is siren-worthy breaking news.
Here's the breaking news. This is an offense preview, and of course, Field Yates is blowing up the spot and giving us a defensive topic to talk about. But as you can see here on the bottom of the screen, breaking news right now, Patriots cornerback Stephon Gilmore has reported to the team for training camp. Per source, that is Field Yates, and he will begin the season on the PUP list after a season-ending injury in 2020. So that quad injury lands him on the PUP list for now. That's really, we talked about this a little bit with the NFI guys off the show, Alex, that this is all kind of procedural at this point. They've still got 6 days till training camp to get Stephon Gilmore off the PUP list. Also, Stephon Gilmore has been around the block a few times in the Patriots defense. So if he starts for the first few practices on the PUP list, then who really ultimately cares? But Stephon Gilmore has reported that basically means the holdout's over, right? I mean, there's really no other. Once you report, you're not holding out anymore.
Well,
so
there's still the questions aren't all answered.
No,
but actually, here's Mike Reese with the rest of the PUP list.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there's some names on here.
All right. Well,
you ready?
Let's get to that in a second.
Okay.
I want to, then you can read your list. I want to just briefly touch. I mean, do we feel, we don't know, right? We're guessing here, but do we feel this must mean that there has to be some sort of resolution here with Gilmore coming, right? I mean, they have to pay him or something.
I would think there's some sort of contract news following this. Yes. I think because the PUP list apparently went out today with Reese reporting it, I would assume that, that had to come out today. If he's going to be on PUP, that means he plans on reporting. So they had to put that out there. And I would think that there's contract news following in the near future.
I agree as well. So we're probably going to we'll probably log off the show and Field Yates will report that Stephon Gilmore signed a new deal or something like that. And we'll have blown that. But Stephon Gilmore's in the building. He has reported. We can read the PUP list now.
Wait, I thought the report date was Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. I think that there is a.
So he reported earlier. He's expected to report.
According,
I guess I have the report date wrong.
Early, okay. Or whatever way you want to put it. I mean, Fields Yates made it sound here like a bunch of the veterans reported today. So obviously there's some early report date or something like that. Let's read the PUP list, but great news on Stephon Gilmore, obviously reporting and in the building. So that seems to be moving in a positive direction. Read the names on the PUP list.
Okay, so some guys we just talked about. I think this is alphabetical. Byron Cowart. So that's not a total surprise. I think he missed time this spring, right?
Yep.
Stephon Gilmore. Terez Hall, little bit of a surprise. Dalton Keene, not a surprise. Brandon King, not a surprise. Devin Smith, practiced, so that's out there a little bit. And then these are two where I said there's some names here. Jarrett Stidham and Chase Winovich will both open the season or open training camp on PUP.
That's interesting. Yeah,
that's not good for Stidham. Well, who do you want to start with? Your show. Who do you want to start with?
Okay, well, Chase Winovich, first of all, we knew about that one. He was dealing with some things during minicamp that held him out of minicamp. He's been in the Foxborough area. He's been training at Gillette Stadium and rehabbing at Gillette Stadium. I don't expect him to be on the PUP list for long. And this happens all the time with the Patriots, especially. Guys start on the PUP list, and then immediately after the first or second day of practice, they're removed from the PUP list, right? So these things happen quickly. I don't expect Chase Winovich to be on the PUP list for very long. The Jarrett Stidham one is very, very interesting because as far as we know, there was not an injury for him during mini camp. Maybe it happened, so he got banged up during training or something like that. I don't know where that one is necessarily coming from. I haven't heard anything about that. And when you start to think about and start to do all the, as we do all the permutations and all the things that could possibly happen, all the predictions, Jarrett Stidham being on the odd man looking in that quarterback room is looking more and more like a possibility. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that we don't know the severity of the injury, so we probably shouldn't start predicting IR stints and stuff like that. But it is really interesting to see him on PUP, and that's certainly not good for him because he needs all the reps that he, to kind of showcase himself.
Well, look, we know how this works. You miss a couple practices, that can be it. If Brian Hoyer comes out hot, that's going to be that. I'm working on right now for 98.5thesportshub.com my top position battles to watch outside of Mac versus Cam. And the reason I'm calling it that and not top position battles to watch outside of quarterback is there is one at quarterback. That third guy. Is it going to be Stidham? Are they going to go with the younger guy, the upside? Or are they going to go with the mentor and Brian Hoyer? And advantage Hoyer right now because he's on the field and Stidham isn't. And like you said, we don't know how long it's going to last, but you figure if they're putting him on there, he's going to miss at least one practice. It doesn't guarantee it. I was trying to figure this out yesterday. I think it was Isaiah Wynn who once came off PUP in the first practice, rendering the whole thing irrelevant.
Right.
But this is not good for Stidham. We saw what happened last year when he kind of faded in training camp, and that was the other way around. He started and then he got hurt. Now he's starting off hurt, but not good for a guy who's trying to make the team and not good for the Patriots who would, at the very least, like to develop some trade value for this guy.
Right. And what I started kind of, when I did my offensive preview, my written post on BSJ, when I started to kind of think about this, I said to myself, well, look, Brian Hoyer.
Hang on, quick update on Gilmore.
Yeah.
Ian Rappaport, no new contract, but Gilmore is present in New England. He'll take his time returning from his injury. So is he not holding out?
I guess,
or is this just it?
I guess he dropped the holdout. Maybe they know.
That'd be incredible.
Maybe Ian might be saying no new contract right this very second, right?
I figure, but
we'll see. It's in this Gilmore thing is really interesting. They obviously incentivized him somehow to report, right? They obviously incentivized him somehow to come and report to the team. I want to get back to Brian Hoyer really quickly though, because Jarrett Stidham's value is obviously, I guess, some upside exists there. But really when you look at that third quarterback spot, is there more value? And I know that this might not be the case, but just presenting the question, facilitating, as Felger would say, is there more value in somebody that can mentor Mac Jones, somebody that can help both Mac Jones and Cam Newton in that quarterback room from a studying perspective, a playbook perspective, an opponent film room perspective, and can run the scout team successfully, while Mac Jones taking that sort of responsibility away from Mac Jones, because running scout team can be confusing for some guys, right? Where you're going back and forth between terminologies and things like that. So Brian Hoyer as a scout team quarterback and basically de facto assistant quarterbacks coach, does that hold more value on the 53-man roster than Jarrett Stidham? And obviously Jarrett Stidham could be traded for something. Right. So you're really talking about Hoyer in trade compensation for Jarrett Stidham or Jarrett Stidham. Which one is going to end up being more valuable? And I guess this is a good transition to kind of talk into some of these quarterback situations as well that we wanted to get to.
Yeah, I'm keeping Hoyer and trading Stidham in that case. I think if you get down to your third quarterback, things have gone so wrong. Having the more immediately competitive guy, I don't know that I'm super worried about that at that point. Give me the guy who's going to make Mac Jones better in the long term. That's all I care about. I will sacrifice a game or two this year if it means Mac Jones is a better player for the next 8 to 10 years. I think that has to be the mindset. There is no reason to be in a win now mode if you're the Patriots at the quarterback position. Give me Brian Hoyer and the draft capital. And we've talked about how valuable these draft picks are for next year. Give me Brian Hoyer and the draft capital over Jarrett Stidham.
Right. I guess it just matters what that draft capital is, but I do really feel like that's an interesting element to this, is that Brian Hoyer, remember back in that 2018 season with the Los Angeles Rams Super Bowl, the gushing the locker room did after that game on the defense about how great Brian Hoyer was on the scout team that week. Right. Emulating Jared Goff. And I also mentioned that sometimes when you have a rookie first round quarterback like Mac, you don't want to flood his brain with another team's playbook every single week, right? You don't want to force him to run scout team all on his own. So Mac's able to work with Josh McDaniels and the Patriots starting offense and work on the Patriots offense all season long, assuming he's backing up Cam for the time being. And Brian Hoyer is your scout team quarterback, and you get something back in the trade for Jarrett Stidham. This all kind of is predicated on Jarrett Stidham playing decently well in the preseason, because they're not going to get anything. They'll get a bag of footballs if he plays like crap in the preseason games. So that's going to be a big kind of part of this as well. But that I think, we've talked a lot about Cam versus Mac. We did whole shows on that, but that third quarterback spot, because I do think that there is going to be a slight COVID element in all of this too, where they might want to carry three quarterbacks again, just in case things pop up with that.
I think beyond that, you have to carry three, like you said, for the scout team. You don't want Mac Jones running the scout team instead of working on his own game.
Right. I agreed 100%. So that's the quarterback minute. Back to the wide receivers really quickly. We got to just briefly touch on N'Keal Harry and his situation. So it sounds to me like the Patriots are going to at least call N'Keal Harry's bluff with this trade demand. I don't expect N'Keal Harry to get moved before training camp. I say that, and of course he'll get moved tonight or something like that. But the expectation is not that he will not get traded before training camp, at least on my end. And I sort of think that the Patriots are saying to N'Keal Harry, this is as much your fault as it is ours. You need to come in here and compete. You need to come here and play hard and do what we're telling you to do and work on your game. And don't blame this all on us, right?
Right.
You're the first round talent. So I think that there is a little bit of a game of chicken going on here between N'Keal Harry and the Patriots.
I would agree with that. I said it when we did the show the day he requested the trade. I think that moving him before camp is probably the better idea for everybody involved. He gets a fresh start, but obviously you get somebody else. I just don't like the idea of having somebody in camp who has no purpose being there. And not all 90 guys need to have a shot at the roster, but you need 4 quarterbacks to make camp go because you just need that many arms. You need, 12, 13 offensive linemen to make camp go. They have enough wide receivers to operate a normal training camp. They have guys who are competing for roster spots who they need to get a look at. If N'Keal's not a part of the plan, let me see Isaiah Zuber more. Let me see Trey Nixon more. Let me see Christian Wilkerson more. Let me see these guys in competitive reps who you actually have to make a decision on instead of N'Keal Harry, who basically already has one foot out the door and might be checked out mentally. So I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think you're right. I think they are going to have him in camp and try to raise his trade value. But if it were me, he'd be gone. He'd be gone by now. You don't want to be here. You're not going to be here.
Yeah, that's totally fair perspective. I come back to the trade value thing. I think, look, I don't want to toot reporters' horns too much, but I do think writing about good camps, strong guys that had strong training camps and things like that does at least create a little bit of buzz around the league about certain players. And then you also have the preseason games. And I see, look, if N'Keal Harry can get out there against some 3rd and 4th string corners and maybe moss some people on a Thursday night preseason game, you never know what team could look at that tape and say, oh, maybe we throw a 5th round pick to the Patriots for N'Keal Harry.
Is bumping that pick up from a 6th to a 5th worth the reps you're taking away from other players? I don't know that it is. I think you could just as simply bump that up by saying, hey, call it a conditional 7th. And if he plays X amount of snaps, it'll be a 5th. If he plays X, it'll be a 5th. I would rather, if I'm the Patriots, take the risk, make it a conditional pick, and open up those reps for other players. I think there's a way to move that pick up. Like, let them evaluate him on their time. Let the other team evaluate him at their camp and figure out if he can moss these 3rd and 4th string corners in their building. And if he can't, yeah, you only end up with a 7th, but if he's not doing it in your building, you're only ending up with a 7th anyway. This way you still have those rips for all the other players.
Alex is done with N'Keal Harry. That's what he's saying. He's washed his hands.
I mean, it sucks. And I do think the Patriots, I've talked about this, I think the Patriots to an extent are at fault for his lack of development. But I just, I believe that everybody should be in camp for a purpose. And I don't think potentially raising day 3 draft stock is enough of a purpose to use a 90-man roster spot on. I just don't believe that.
Okay, so you got the top 3 guys, Myers, Bourne, Aguilar. Yes. Gunnar Olszewski is obviously going to make the team as the 4th receiver or 5th receiver, whichever way you want to put him in the depth chart. Who, assuming N'Keal Harry is not here, just really quickly, give me a name. Zuber, Nixon, Christian Wilkerson, Marvin Hall. Who's the guy that gets the 5th spot?
N'Keal can be here. I'm going with Zuber. I said before they announced it, I thought they were going to try to move him. I think it's Zuber. I think his special teams ability. I think his, kind of wild card offensive ability with the jet sweeps and stuff like that. There's too much versatility. There's too much explosiveness. You mentioned they are kind of a slower offense. He definitely adds some speed. I think it's Zuber. I'm not going to sleep on Wilkerson. He's kind of my sleeper pick for that spot, but I had Zuber on my initial roster projection. So far, nothing has changed. I'm riding with him.
I hate when I agree with you so much. Yeah, Zuber, I agree with that 5th spot. I love the versatility, like you said. I love the kick return ability. I think last year they kind of struggled to find a guy that could be a real dynamic kick returner back there. They had a dynamic punt returner. Gunnar didn't really work out as much as a kick returner. If Zuber, which he did very, very well in college, can take some kicks back, then that really does add a little bit. The role that you look at is that Cordero Patterson role from a few years ago, right? Jet sweeps, end arounds, gadget plays, kick return ability. If he can be sort of a Cordero Patterson light, then that's a nice find as a 5th receiver. And the other thing with N'Keal is if you're the 4th or the 5th receiver and you're not playing in the kicking game, then you have to almost play in the kicking game.
You're not going to be the 4th and 5th receiver.
Right. Like if you're wide receiver 4 or 5 and you can't contribute on special teams, then you are not going to be that player.
Now, to be fair, he did return kicks in college.
He did.
And we talked about this when they drafted him, and it never really came to fruition. If he is going to stay and he does want to make the team, we talked about, the potential kick returners earlier, Zuber, Gunner, JJ Taylor. They let Kyle Duggar return some kicks last year. He was okay. I don't think they'll have him do it again, but he could. I think N'Keal has to factor into that conversation as well.
Okay, let's talk about running backs. We've talked about Damian Harris a little bit. We've talked about Sony a little bit.
Well, I have a quick spiel on that.
Okay.
Quick thing. Because I get asked, and I'm sure you do too all the time, who is RB1? Who is the Patriots running back one?
Yeah.
And let's throw a quick definition on what RB1 means for the Patriots in the Patriots offense, not fantasy football nonsense. The Patriots have not had a running back play over 50% of their snaps since LeGarrett's last year. That would be 2016.
Right.
Only twice since 2016 has a guy gone over 40% of the snaps. That was James White twice. What RB1 really means, it has nothing to do with playing time, because they're going to split things pretty evenly, I believe, between Sony Michel and Damian Harris, assuming they stay healthy. RB1 is more of a situational term than it is a usage term. 3rd and 1 in the 4th quarter. Who gets the ball? Up 3 points. You need to drive to run out the clock. Who gets the ball?
Early down back role.
Right. Well, they're both going to be early down, but in terms of who's the starter, who's the main guy, don't look at snap count. Look at leverage. One guy may play more, but he may play just low leverage situations. Again, and 1 to go, 4th down, late in games. Who's on the field in those situations? That's your RB1.
And also, I just want to add, I also see a lot out there in the fantasy football crowd, mostly talking about how Damian Harris is going to dominate the rush attempts in New England, and he's going to be the clear cut, as you call it, RB1. I don't feel that way. I still feel like they're going to use Sony Michel. I don't know if it's going to, how much he's going to kind of cut into Damian Harris's rushing attempts, but Sony Michel last year, when Damian Harris kind of pushed him a little bit and pushed the envelope, had a very, very productive season. Sony Michel averaged 5.7 yards per carry last year. Now, a lot of that has to do with the offensive line, with Cam Newton's running through all these types of things, right? And it's a smaller sample, it's about 80 carries or something like that. But the main point I'm making here is that I still think that Damian Harris and Sony Michel are going to be in somewhat of a committee. Now, it might be a 75-25 committee or a 60-40 committee in favor of Damian Harris, but I think that Sony Michel is going to touch the ball plenty out of that backfield, and it is not going to be just a full-on Damian Harris show, as some people have thrown out there, because when Bill Belichick has 2 capable early down backs, he typically uses 2 capable early down backs. It's only when they've really been forced to only use one guy because they don't have anybody else behind that guy, like Garrett Blount or Court Dillon or someone like that has dominated the carries in those instances. But when they have 2 guys, they typically use both guys, right? They've typically spread the wealth around a little bit. All right. Yesterday, Ramondre Stevenson placed on the non-football injury list. He's been dealing with some nagging injuries and things like that. I'm less concerned about his health and all that kind of stuff. More wondering, and I think this is the big question everybody was asking, probably both of us, Alex, yesterday when this news came out, is this just a prerequisite to Ramondre Stevenson being that redshirt rookie running back that we're so accustomed to seeing?
Probably. Again, They never truly replaced Rex Burkhead, and Stevenson is, for all the comps to LeGarrette Blount, he actually might be closer to Rex Burkhead in terms of what he can do. He's excellent in the passing game, especially as a blocker, which is somewhere that Burkhead succeeded. So, if you want a 1-for-1 swap with Burkhead's role, Stevenson makes sense. But there is that rookie situation. It does look like it's going to be a redshirt year. And, between JJ Taylor and Brandon Bolden, because people forget, Brandon Bolden's like sneaky good in the passing game.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers the wheel route against Denver. I know Murph remembers if he's still watching or listening, but between those 2 guys, you can kind of fill what Burkhead did. It's just an extra guy you got to keep on the roster, even though both those guys are probably going to make the team anyway. So, I think this is, the beginning of, hey, here's Ramondre Stevenson. All right, you'll see him again in 2022. So
I kind of feel the same way, unfortunately, as much as I would like to see Ramondre.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off real quick. Him not playing this year does not make him a bad player.
Yes.
I went through this BS with Damian Harris 2 years ago. I'm not doing this again. Him not playing does not make him a bad pick, does not make him a bad player. This is how they do business. Do not bother me with this crap this year. Okay? We will see if he was a good pick or not in 2 years when he actually plays.
Bother me with this crap.
It was the whole thing, because I was a big Damian Harris guy, and it was, he's a boss. He can't even get on the field where they wasted another pick on a running back. He's pretty darn good. James White had 14 touches as a rookie. Freaking relax with the rookie running backs before you write them off. We've seen this happen a million times. There is hard evidence that this is how they do business. Whether you agree or not that it's the right choice, that's a discussion we can have. I personally like that they do it, but if you're against it, that's fine. That's another discussion. A running back not playing as a rookie does not mean he sucks. All right, I'm done.
No one even got you going. You just got yourself going.
People got me going last year, and it came back up.
Okay, so with Ramondre Stevenson real fast, as soon as he starts missing practices, that's when you know that this is all a prerequisite for him to get redshirted, right? Because if he misses a week or if he misses more than a week of training camp, forget about it, right? Just forget about it. They're not going to throw a rookie running back out there that missed the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks of camp. It's not going to happen. So I definitely think that could be, but I'm not ready to say it is yet until he truly starts missing camp practices. If we get out there next Wednesday, next Thursday, and he's not out there, then I'm going to start to say, okay, well, this is probably your typical red shirt. JJ Taylor, does he cut into James White snaps? I think everybody really likes JJ Taylor. I think he's like one of the fan favorites. A lot to like about him. Yeah. The coaching staff really likes him. Ivan Fears is always extremely high on him. I think the one element, he does bring a little bit of juice, a pretty good explosiveness. And the one element that maybe he has a little bit more of right now because of his age and that explosiveness compared to James White is the ability to vertically get up the field. We saw him in minicamp get targeted deep down the field quite a bit, wheel routes, flex them out wide and have him run a double move, things of that nature. It is a little bit, you have to be accurate because he is tiny, right? So he doesn't have a large catch radius per se, but he does have that ability to get behind the defense a little bit where maybe some of their running backs, especially the bigger backs, aren't going to have that element to them.
So what's tricky with Taylor is, and this gets lost a lot when we talk about receiving running backs, right? As important as it is to run routes and catch the ball, and that's all important, you got to be able to block because about half the time you're going to be staying in pass protection in these situations. And Taylor is listed at 5'6", 185. And, what happens when J.J. Watt, they're not playing the Cardinals this year, whoever, right, comes flying around the edge and Taylor's got to pick him up one-on-one and chip him. Now, I'm not saying he can't do it. Darren Sproles was a pretty good blocker. And Darren Sproles was not a big guy, but he didn't, it wasn't a strength of Taylor's in college. We didn't really see one way or the other him do it much last year. So this is where, again, we go back to that redshirt season with the rookie running backs. You'd think one of the things they worked on with him last year while he wasn't playing was his ability to pass protect. So if he's progressed in that ability, and we see that in training camp, then all of a sudden we start talking about, okay, here's the 1-for-1 swap with Rex Burkhead. You're going to plug, because Burkhead was a good blocker too. You're going to plug him in. He can run the ball in a traditional set. He can catch the ball. He can pass block. Boom, you're golden. If pass blocking's still an issue, then, can he cut into James White snaps? Maybe a little bit, but against blitz heavy teams, you might have to use White. You might have to use Damian Harris. You might have to use Brandon Bolden, somebody who's going to hold up a little bit better pass blocking. So if you're looking at JJ Taylor and what's his role going to be, and is he going to make the team? If you're following camp and those are your questions, you want to look at JJ Taylor as a pass blocker, because that's what's going to come down to him having maybe a minor role in the offense versus him playing a more significant role. Yeah,
I agree. And as much as he can be really productive as a receiver, really flashy as a receiver and dynamic, be a threat.
Right.
Out there, both out of the backfield. And like I said, there are instances, even last year, there was one throw, I think, that they didn't connect on it, but he did run a double move and he beat the guy. He did run a double move in minicamp, I remember, and he got behind the defense again. He has that element to his game. He has a nice burst to him when he runs the football. But like you said, it's going to be all those elements. Is he going to be able to pick up a blitz? Is he going to know, not only physically be able to pick up a blitz, but know where he's supposed to go when he is in blitz pickup? Because the Patriots, as an offense, in terms of schematically, they really are a dual read system. And what a dual read system means is that the running back can be 2-for-1 a lot of the time, and he is going to have to pick who is going to block based off of who's the nearest threat, what the other kind of blocking scheme and what everybody else is sort of doing on a given play. It is not easy to block and pass protect in the Patriots system because of the complexities in which they sort of do it, and there's reasons for why they do that. But the dual read system is confusing for young players. That's why a lot of these guys don't get on the field in pass protection because of those issues. So it's definitely going to be the number one thing for JJ Taylor. He's a dynamic player. I also, we mentioned earlier in the show that he has that ability to return kickoffs. I think that's going to be a little bit of a factor here as well, where you might be able to see him have a role returning kickoffs, spelling James White a little bit in low leverage situations. And maybe he does see a little bit more playing time this season. And we got to talk at least 5 minutes about the offensive line. I keep on trying to come up with things to talk about with the offensive line, and it's good, right? I mean, it's a good group. There are obviously some injury concerns with the tackles mainly. Michael Onwenu moving inside to guard. We could discuss the OT depth beyond kind of the top three if you're going to assume Onwenu's the top backup. Justin Herron, Will Sherman, Corey Cunningham, kind of Yannick Kajus. He's alive. He's going to be.
We could probably use these 5 minutes to let you tell us what's going on with Yodny Kajus.
Yodny Kajus is alive. He is actually going to be out there. He is going to participate in training.
That's right. He's not on. Is this the first time he hasn't been on PUP?
He is not on PUP. He's 100% healthy. He is going to be out there. It's unbelievable, right? He is actually going to participate in a real Patriots practice on Wednesday. A real training camp practice.
Knock on wood. There's still a week to go.
I'm smiling. I love it. I can't wait to see Yodny Kajus out there. What if Yodny Kajus...
You're just missing your boy Yelda.
I know. So I got to move on to
still
Kajus.
In Houston? Yeah, yeah.
I think so. What if Yodny Kajus actually ends up being something? Like he had a ton of talent. He was always hurt. It's a big concern. But what if he actually ends up being something? What a career that would be, right? Like what a story that would be if he actually ended up working out.
Well, he had upside, and if you want to play this game, if he has a great camp, then we can start talking about potentially moving Isaiah Wynn again, right? He still has that rookie option year, but 2 years left on his deal. If you could probably get something pretty good for him, or maybe you trade Kajust and you get something for him because they're going to need at least one tackle next year, potentially two. They're going to need a corner. You do need to start acquiring draft capital if you're the Patriots, and Yanni Kajus could be a way to do that if he shows up and plays, which we'll see.
We'll see. There's a lot of time between now and next Wednesday, so you never know. Yanni, stay safe, all right? Just stay safe, stay well, get yourself out there because there's potential there. And when you watched him at West Virginia protecting Will Grier and on the left side playing left tackle, he looked and had the tape of a starting left tackle. There's a lot of scouts at that time that said, hey, this guy probably would have been a top 50, top 75 pick if it wasn't for all of the injuries, right? There's real starter potential here when you just look at raw ability and you look at tape. So don't write him off just yet. He's back. He is healthy. He's going to be out there and he has ability. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Are you at all worried about the tackle depth though? Because Isaiah Wynn has his injury issues. Trent Brown didn't exactly stay healthy with the Raiders for a full 16 games either. We talked about the situation where Ted Karras comes into the starting lineup on when it can kick back outside to the right side and the beat goes on and all that kind of stuff. But beyond that, you have Cunningham, you have Sherman, you have Justin Herron, who I think you're pretty high on, and I am as well. So maybe Herron ends up being sort of the fourth tackle, and the wild card is Kajust.
I think Herron is, a borderline starting NFL tackle right now. I think he can play both sides, which is super helpful. I use this comp all the time. Adrian Waddle, a guy that, if you go into the season. He
kind of has a lot of the same issues as Adrian Waddle too. Play strength, I think, is a big one for him. And just in terms of having that sturdy outside hand, right? You don't want to let guys run through that outside hand as easily as he did at times in terms of pass protection. It's kind of weird because Herron was a much better pass protector in college and not a very good run blocker. And then once he got to the NFL last season, it completely flipped. He was a very good run blocker last year and struggled in pass pro.
Well, he was he was playing mostly on the right side in college, right?
He played left tackle his last year.
Did he? Okay.
Outside hand was a big one, right? Sturdier
Yeah.
outside hand. He also tended to have a little bit of a false step coming out of his stance. And when you false step as a tackle, obviously that's problematic. It makes it a lot easier to get the corner on you, and that can be a problem. So those are all things, though, that Carmen Bracello and Cole Popovich can work out of him, right? You know, those are technique issues. The strength thing, though, is kind of on him, right? He's got to go in the weight room. He's got to add to his core and be a little bit stronger and not get bull rushes easily, not give up that outside hand as easily.
Yeah, but he's a guy where, do you go into the season with him as your starting tackle? It's a little iffy. If you have him as a third guy who you need to make 4 or 5 starts, I think that's a good role for him. Again, I'm high on him, and I like Sherman. I do. I think there's some intrigue there. He's a potential 5-position player on the offensive line. That's incredibly rare. I liked enough of what I saw from him at Colorado that if he's the 4th tackle, if we're just going to count on Onwenu as a guard, that I think they'll be all right. I'm really not too worried anything depth-wise on the offensive line. I think between Ted Karras, Michael Onwenu, and William Sherman, the versatility of those 3 guys, they're in very good shape up front.
Let's still clap for Dante Scarnecchia, because not only does he lay the foundation for how they coach offensive linemen and how they drill offensive linemen, he's still heavily involved in the scouting. He still has a heavy hand in how they scout offensive linemen. He kind of wrote the book on how they're going to scout offensive linemen and what the attributes they are going to look for and stuff. And they just keep on turning these guys out, right? Like the Patriots can't miss on day 3. It feels like, you know, even Justin Herron is a solid backup offensive lineman in the NFL, right? You know, he might not be a starter, but as a 6th-round pick to get a guy that can be a third or a swing tackle, that's pretty darn good.
I've said this before. I didn't think this was the conversation we're going to have today. When we talked about Marshall Newhouse, right, in 2019 and how much of a problem he was, the reason that they had that issue was because they had Adrian Waddle and they let him go and tackles got hurt and they had to scramble. That's an incredibly valuable player, that third swing tackle. And if Herron can fill that role, it prevents you from having to plug in a guy like a Marshall Newhouse. So, yeah, it's certainly encouraging.
All right. Well,
did you think we were going to talk about Marshall Newhouse today?
I did not. I did not think we were going to go down this road, but I am still just jubilant about Yodny Kajus not being on the PUP list and finally getting out there for us to see, because I was such a big Kajus guy in the draft. I was so glad when they drafted him. You remember we were live on the air together when they drafted him, and I was given the fist pump, right?
Butchered his name. You're like, wait, are you trying to say Yodny Kajus?
Yeah, I didn't know who you were talking about because he butchered the name so bad.
Well, they had him and Yelda went back to back, right?
Yes,
they were just trying to torture me.
Yeah, it was tough. But yeah, I really am glad for Yodny Kajus that he's going to get back out there. Sorry, we went a little bit long. I shouldn't say sorry. I'm sure you guys seemed like you guys enjoyed it good enough, but we went a little bit long because of the breaking news there with Stephon Gilmore and the PUP guys. Alex and I will be back on the show on Tuesday, training camp eve episode. We'll do some more preview stuff. We'll talk about what we hear from the players and Patriots head coach Bill Belichick on Tuesday.
Players talking Tuesday too. I thought it was just Bill.
I believe we're gonna get like Devin McCourty, the statesman, right? Probably some of the returning captains. I am pumped. I mean, we still got a couple more days here to recharge and get ready, but we are all extremely pumped for this, and we're gonna have you covered all training camp long here on Patriots Beat, and we're gonna take you through all season long, really, on Patriots Beat. So it's going to be a great time. Like I said, we're going to do as many shows as we physically possibly can during training camp to keep you guys updated on what's going on out there at Pat's Camp. Hopefully we'll see some of you guys at Pat's Camp as well. If you guys are out there, then come holler at us and come say hello, and we'll be happy to see the fans back out there, and it will have a much more juice this time around. But again, Alex and I will be back on the show on Tuesday night. We'll probably take some questions. We'll do some preview stuff that we didn't get to because these ran a little bit long than what we were expecting. So we'll see you on Tuesday night. Thanks so much for watching tonight, guys, and we'll see you next week. Training camp next week. Get pumped, everybody.
Oh.